Welcome to Tanversations. I'm Tanya, a 20 something working in venture capital and excited about the Web3 space. In this podcast, I'm going to be diving into the biggest questions that I have, mostly about work, but also about life and everything in between, by turning to my elders that include venture capitalists, experts, entrepreneurs, writers, philosophers, activists, and even 26-year-olds. So grab your pumpkin spice lattes, kombucha, iced coffee, and 16th other beverage as we go through these conversations together. My guest for today is Sandy Peng, the co-founder of Scroll. Scroll is a layer 2 zkEVM solution that aims to provide lower costs at higher throughput for decentralized applications running on Ethereum. In this interview, we talk about Sandy's journey, the problem that Scroll is trying to solve, and unique applications being built on Scroll. Sandy also goes deeper into the rollup technology and what she's excited about in 2024. Uh, so great to have you today, Sandy. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite, Tanya.
Yeah, I'd love to start off with a little bit of an introduction about yourself and your journey and how you got into crypto.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a entrepreneur in the crypto space. We're building a rollup for Ethereum, and the product is called zkEVM. And what it offers essentially is a open source program for scaling Ethereum to an order or two orders or three orders of magnitude going forward. So it's a very exciting project. We have a global team, and we also have a global audience. We launched mainnet a few months ago, and it's just been a very fun process of building out the ecosystem and getting more people engaged and interacting with the product.
Yeah, for sure. So congrats on the mainnet. But I also kind of wanted to dive a little bit into your journey personally and, how you got introduced to crypto and what made you kind of even think about, starting Scroll.
I started in crypto a long time ago, so in about 2013, 14. And I read about Bitcoin on the Wired magazine and thought it was really interesting. And then, did some research and found the white paper online and then started attending some of the Bitcoin meetups locally. So that was how I got my start. I think what attracted me initially is the ideology of the paper, and then later on, as we did more digging, there was a deeply social and participatory aspect to it. The fact that you could mine it, you could buy it, you can be a meaningful hold. Like being a holder means like you're aligned, and then there's like incentive to keep you coming back to the community. And then just the permissionless payment use case was super fascinating at a time when there was a lot of fintech and payment related developments happening around the world. So I think it's an interesting cryptographic technical product whose that has caught on to a major social trend. Um, and so that was a very inspiring process. And what's equally inspiring was the launch of Ethereum, being the world's kind of first decentralized computer. It had a very different mission, and because of some of its unique aspects of its founder, core team, and the community, it also took on a slightly different path. But the things in common are it's aiming to be a fully decentralized primitive, and it also has a global reach, and it also but the difference is that Ethereum is constantly evolving. um, with the exception of recent Bitcoin development and ordinals and bitmaps and various things, I think Bitcoin has been relatively static. And being static is actually somewhat good for its development because how it's used, and and it gives time for that narrative and use case to manifest itself while being in a stable state. Ethereum has been evolving a lot. So in the last few years, it changed from POW to POS. This is due to mainly a goal of being more environmentally more sustainable, and that reduced carbon emission of the entire ecosystem by, like 99%. Um, and there are lots of other upgrades along the same line. So dank sharding and rollups is another major direction. It's a push for Ethereum to become more accessible. So the price of Ethereum with the launch of Scroll is going to become 10 times cheaper and 10 times faster with instant finality. And the goal of Scroll is to be an extension of Ethereum and to extend it both in terms of like transactional throughput. So both in terms of like we can compact like thousands and tens of thousands of transactions into one block and therefore expand the deliberate kind of block space limit on base layer Ethereum. So we scale that exponentially. And also with the pricing and the speed increase, we're also hoping to scale the social layer exponentially. So, and that means discovering more types of interactions and use cases on chain, and also expanding the development and on chain entrepreneurial opportunities to the developing world by like user education, developer education, and then also just facilitating exchange of ideas and exchanging the entrepreneurial journey, kind of like what we're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just based off of what you said, how you want to kind of uh, also target the developing world. So right
Mhm.
now, like a big focus of crypto as a whole has been kind of the developed world, just because of the infrastructure and things like that that's available. But can you talk a little bit more about why it's so important to scroll to also, make it more inclusive, bring in the developing world? I know you also recently kind of hired some people in Turkey, and so just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think the mission to be like a developing world ready L2 has been there since the inception. And our goal is to find a few test cases where we can combine on like business efforts along with dev efforts and apply it in a way that makes sense for the local environment. So we started off with Turkey because it's a densely populated country and with a lot of young population and with a very high percentage of crypto adoption.
Yeah.
And lastly, it is in a hyperinflation environment. So
Yeah.
that means inflation rate is sometimes over 50%. And so there's a strong alignment for young people and just general users to use stablecoin types of products as a store of value. So, but the on-off ramp, the user experience, and what you can do with the stablecoin stored in a wallet, all of these areas have huge areas for improvement. So, and this is only possible with a secure layer two, such as Scroll. So this is kind of our right to win and our market to capture. So we're going to dedicate a lot of resources in markets such as these, so that we can be of so we can be of use.
Yeah, for sure. So apart from Turkey, are there other markets in the developing world that you're actively targeting right now, or it's something that's, down in the roadmap later?
Yeah, so we're working very closely with entrepreneurs in Nigeria, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, and Eastern Europe. So, amongst these places, the common thread is that there's a lot of high quality talent, but relatively a lack of opportunity. So, part of this is that we hope that blockchain can make can essentially provide a level playing field and and so that entrepreneurs in places that were previously neglected from a business standpoint, these are kind of like opportunities for value capture. So we want to tap into these.
Yeah, for sure. So just kind of backtracking a little bit and diving more into, Scroll and the technology behind it. So, for a lot of people who might not really know too much about rollups, can you talk about that and also why ZK?
Yeah, sure. So roll up is just like in any industry, there are specific terminologies to describe particular primitives or design choices. So roll up is a type of um, in essence, it's the transactional layer for the Ethereum blockchain stack. So when you think about, there's been a popular term that's often used, thrown around in the ecosystem called the modular stack. That means each team works on very specific sets of the stacks. So as a user, in both in Web 2 and Web 3, you interact with different layers of the internet, but you may not necessarily know that as an end user. And in Web 3, because there is this need to be, to be decentralized, there are the stack is almost kind of self-organizing and self-coordinating, and there's a much more competitive process of being a part of a Web3 stack. So where that stack will ultimately land, it's still a matter of uncertainty. And that's why there's so much opportunity and there's so many great infrastructure companies trying to provide this like stack base. And so, long story short, in the Web3 stack, in the Ethereum space at least, there's going to be a transaction layer such as Scroll, and then there's going to be a settlement layer such as Ethereum, and then on top of it, there's the application layer, which is where the users interact. So when you interact with the blockchain, it's often through a wallet, typically, or through a web interface of some sort.
Yeah.
And once you enter the blockchain transaction, then there is that transaction stack. So like where does your transaction gets like recorded, or gets facilitated? Like a transaction means, at some point there's like a finality that the transaction goes through. It goes from like Alice to Bob, and Bob receives it, and that's the end of the transaction. In this stack design, Ethereum records the end result of the transaction. It records that Sandy transferred $1 to Tanya, or vice versa. The historical record is stored on Ethereum, and the transaction process of going from A to B happens on Scroll. And there are multiple flavors of rollups that are competing to be this transactional layer. And that ties into your second question of why ZK. So the major choices for the transactional stack is ZK versus Optimism. And there are pros and cons to each. And ultimately, when we look back in history, I think the market will decide. Optimistic rollup has the benefit of being early. It was early and more ready to market, and that means it's built up a network effect of liquidity, in the likes of um, uh, Arbitrum and Optimism. There's a huge liquidity pool, which is a helpful tool for early projects that is trying to gain traction. Um, the benefit of the ZK stack is manifold. So the first problem, the advantages of ZK, being a new technology, um, it needs to bring a lot of additional benefits. It needs to be an order of magnitude better than the incumbent for it to have a right to have a chance of winning the stack, the race. And the advantage comes in mainly that there is instant finality. That means when you transfer in and out of a network, the timing for that finality, like at what point can you 100% confirm the money is in your account? So that time is almost instant.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Optimism and Arbitrum design, that's like a 7-day transfer time. So, comparable to a banking experience. So when you transfer internationally, typically it's T plus one, if or T plus zero if it's you're transferring to another account in Singapore. So when you don't cross borders, it's typically T plus zero, T plus one. But when you're transferring from Singapore to Nigeria or Tanzania, or somewhere in the US, I think the timing is typically a lot longer, sometimes up to 10 or 20 days. depending on your destination bank and how many interbanks you go through. And the fee differs from almost zero to sometimes I've seen fees up to $200 for a transfer. If it goes through lots of intermittent banks, and if there is lots of middle facilitators in between, and they need to do multiple KYC checks for the recipient and the sender. So these are all friction in a typical transaction process. So in the back to the blockchain world, in the Optimism and Arbitrum case, that processing time is 7 days. It allows for good actors or good nodes to challenge a particular transaction, so that when a transaction takes place, it gets broadcasted. Everybody knows that Sandy is sending $1 to Tanya on the entire network, and we are allowing enough time for good actors to flag that, oh, this is not an attack. This is not a fraudulent behavior. Both parties are voluntary and give consent to this transaction. So this leaves enough time for safety for the transaction to arrive. zk, on the other hand, processes transaction in a near instant sense, and that's similar to a Singapore to Singapore, HSBC to HSBC type of transaction. And so the benefit of that is just like, the trust required is much lower and the convenience level is much higher. And when you're moving a large amount, and this it does not mean large in absolute terms, but just
Mhm.
whatever is deemed like large to you as an individual, this is where instant finality matters. And um, and, and then another way to think about it is the multitude of different use cases that might appear on chain going forward with cheaper transaction. So the first instance is identity as a use case. So when you think about the process of opening up a account abstraction wallet, so typically you would note down your password, and the password would be stored on chain in a key store, and then there would be a paymaster, and then the whole process on the back end of it. And so the with zk, because of the finality time is much shorter, it means the time of settling on a account opening and also discovering a lost wallet is near instant. And
Mm.
this creates a much better user experience. So imagine when you are trying to open an email. Do you want an email that opens instantly, or do you want an email that tells you in 7 days' time, oh, sorry, tanya@gmail.com is not available? Like in 7 days' time, you would have forgotten about this exercise already. You
Yeah.
want instant feedback to say, okay, it's not available, try another one. And then you're going to try like, a slightly different one.
Yeah.
Or when you've lost your mobile phone, or you've locked yourself out of your house, you want to be able to discover your key almost instantly. Like if you have to take 7 days to recover the
Yeah.
keys, then that's like a suboptimal user experience. So these are the things, design space that zk rollups open up in theory. And then there's another vertical of multiple zk dApps that are emerging in the space. So zk, it's kind of similar to blockchain. It's a technical kind of setup that allows developers to manipulate the mathematical structure to achieve different effects. So scaling is one of the major effects, and privacy is another that you often see use cases. So long story short, there's a range of interactions on chain created by zk applications, and these applications interact a little bit more interoperably, interact a little bit more interoperably with a zk rollup due
Okay.
to the compatibility design factors, and that's also super important. So and I think if I were a builder looking to start something in the blockchain space today, I would pick something that's a little bit more future proof.
Mm.
So for an application that is that needs like instant access and needs like instant liquidity support, I think Optimism and Arbitrum would make more sense. For a project that is building for the long term, that wants to be in a ecosystem and a community that is kind of future proof, and then where you are able to tap into the latest tools and the latest design primitives, then I think zk rollup is a better choice.
Okay. And how does scroll in particular differentiate itself from other zkEVMs? Because I know Polygon's been doing a lot of work around it as well. So what is Scroll's kind of unique advantage?
So the zkEVM product, by definition and by design, is a very specific product scope. What it means is a product that has exactly the same developer experience as Ethereum. So any team or product that has achieved the true zkEVM offers a very similar kind of developer experience. Um, I think the differences lies in the ecosystem, lies in the community, and then the vibe and the product focused. I think what's a little bit different from Polygon is that Scroll is very focused on grassroots developers,
Yeah.
and we put grassroots developers' needs and requirements first and foremost when we come to resource prioritization and when it comes to strategies. And second of all, I think the difference is somewhat in product focus. zkEVM is the only product that we work on at Scroll, so we're very focused on designing the next generation of zkEVM, and we're also, from a developer-centric perspective, constantly thinking about how to expand the EVM design primitive. um, and if in a relatively more like businessy and more like BD led organization, typically the strategy is more designed around what the customer needs and meeting those. For us, it's more about kind of meeting what developers needs and how to be more long term aligned with the Ethereum development roadmap. So even though the product is exactly the same, I think the teams have very different DNAs and want to go to very different destinations, or rather like have very different aspirations and different definitions of success.
Yeah, for sure. And so I just wanted to take because you talk so much about developers and how you target like grassroots developers and things like that. So I did want to talk a little bit more about that. So you recently did mention that you had a mainnet, but before that you also had one of the most well participated test nets in the L2 history. So what was the process for you for doing that, and especially leading up to the mainnet?
Yeah, so this comes from the core of us trying to launch the most developer-centric rollup. And when we think about what developers need first and foremost from an infrastructure such as layer two, is that they need high levels of security and they need high uptime and they need as much assurance possible that they have a stable environment to build in. What devs don't need is the fastest or the loudest or the coolest. These are not metrics that matter for an infrastructure player. What matters is that we are safe, we are reliable, we're constantly running, and then also with whatever feedback, we also respond very quickly. So if there's any design features that devs need, then we can add to it, we can build it, we can respond to it if we didn't know these feedback already. Um, and so the most anticipated and most used testnet, so just to reiterate some stats, so we had 90 million transactions during our testnet. We
Wow.
ran the testnet for 15 months. So we were actually the first zkEVM to launch a POC, like a proof of concept product. And but we were compared to Polygon and zk Sync, we launched the mainnet a few months later. And the reason for that is because we had multiple external audit firms to audit Scroll. And second of all, we're an open source project, which means there are lots of external contributors to Scroll. The downside is that it makes the coordination problem a little bit more difficult, but the upside is that there are multiple third parties participating in the process, and therefore avoiding any potential blind spots that any one team might have. So imagine you have a kind of a group of almost like a UN type of developer crew. Then everyone comes from their unique vantage points, but the different time zone and the different languages makes the coordination a little bit more difficult. Um, And but the upside is that this is good for feedback, and it's good for engagements around the world. It means the Scroll team is able to kind of present their findings in many different forums around the world, and meet lots of developers where they're at. And we've ran all the historical transactions on Ethereum L1 in history, just to make sure that we can cover all the edge cases that have happened before. And then we also ran all the historical transactions on BSC, just to make sure that there isn't any kind of new contract designs or heavy load that we can't kind of anticipate. So the I think the result is that in the few months since launch, we've not been making headlines for any issues, and that means everything works. So things working typically don't make the headlines.
Yeah.
You see the headline when certain bridges aren't working, where funds are stuck, where there's a major hack, or where there is like just things not working. You hear about in the news all the time. Whereas things working and developers happy, the fact that we have onboarded over 120 dApps on the ecosystem.
Wow.
These things are not particularly newsworthy, but these are meaningful progress, and it compounds over time because of the nature of the product stack where we're in. So if you are an application, being top of mind and being loud and being like, creating excitement is very important. But being an infrastructure, I think it's about being known to be reliable, and building that track record of continuous and reliable operational capability is super important.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And so, out of those 120 dApps, are there any, use cases or any dApps that really surprised you that are, kind of building on Scroll?
Yeah, of course. Um, so, uh, so I think Scroll in a so going back to what's different about Scroll, the instant finality is one aspect. So I'm very excited to see a lot of DeFi plus kind of DeFi extension type of products that really leverages this design feature. And typically, this means a better perp experience. It means your trades settle faster because we have a very, very short block time. And this means you can have like passive earning through a with much better yield. That's another upside. The third thing is that Okay. So the third thing is that we see a lot of identity and AI related applications. So, for example, Ethereum attestation services, and there's a range of KYC, like opt-in KYC type of public good solutions. These offer an important alternative to WorldCoin, which relies on offline bio data gathering. So we want to demonstrate that there is an alternative to solve the AGI problem, and we're very glad to see a range of experimentation to this extent happening on Scroll. And this is enabled by cheaper transaction pricing, and also faster finality. The third part that we would love to see more of is experimentations around the last mile of the payment processing problem. This is essentially the holy grail for blockchain, which previously a lot of the blockchain infrastructure projects wanted to do, but the technology was lacking, or the social consensus lacking, or the business motivations were lacking. For whatever reason, no one has managed to do this super well, not even Bitcoin. And that is one of Scroll's kind of core mission, to have a go at crackling this like really tough nut.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a big problem, I guess. So, what I really wanted to also ask you was, so 2021 was all about L1s, So you had Solana, Luna, Avalanche, and you guys are obviously in L2. And then in 2022, we saw like a shift to L2s with, Arbitrum and Optimism, like you said. And the TVL actually for the first time exceeded that of L1s. So do you think the L2 season is going to continue as we move into 2024, or what is your perspective on that?
I certainly hope the app season continues. And because I think more innovation needs to happen on the application layer and the use case layer. Um, I think I think anyone that continues to build and iterate on infrastructure should be rewarded for their work. And but there is a kind of a natural progression for the attention and kind of usage in the market to be driven by the final destination, which is the applications.
Okay.
That I think it's almost a matter of certainty that L2 development will continue at breakneck speed, and there's going to be a ton of innovation coming out of this space. And I can imagine that will continue to impress and capture the imagination of developers and users around the world.
Yeah, for sure. And what are you personally excited for 2024 in terms of trends in the space, and what are you looking out for?
So I think in terms of trends in the space, I'm definitely very, very excited to always look at new creative products that are coming out and new products and teams that are taking on ambitious challenges and problems to solve. Um, I'm really excited to kind of be in a position to hopefully support them as an infrastructure and also as a community partner and nurture their growth and also kind of provide feedback where necessary.
Okay. Yeah, and the last question, which I guess I can't do any podcast interview without asking this, but do you have any updates on your token, or is there going to be a token launch?
Yeah, I cannot comment on that, but thank you for the
Okay.
question. It's been a
Yeah,
great interview. Thank you so much for your time, Tanya.
thanks so much.